Hi, everybody. This is Karsten, along with Gene Gearing. We're from Lean 42, and you are either watching or listening to Lean 42 Live. And Gene and I, we're CIO advisors in Europe and North America. Our discussions here are for CIOs, enterprise architect, IT leaders, and it's really about bridging the gap between business strategy and execution and really having informal discussions to connect on industry and market trends, challenges that you as IT leaders face. And we're also open to suggestions from our guest on how to overcome them and how to work with those challenges and see what we have in stock today. So I'm very happy for today to be joined by Dan Hepta. He's with Mega, based out of Massachusetts in the US. And Dan, why don't you give like a quick intro into kind of like yourself?
Sure. So I'm in the enterprise architecture industry. Mega is, of course, a software provider in the EA space. And I've been with Mega since early 2001, so quite a bit of time. And in that time, I've had the pleasure of dealing with a significant quantity of companies and their enterprise architecture initiatives and guiding them towards success, identifying sort of common pitfalls or problems, pathways towards value. And I'm excited to talk more about it today.
Excellent. So we also, or like one of the things also is like about enterprise architecture and how to like link artificial intelligence and EA or EA tools. So tell us a little bit about how AI
Mhm.
works at Mega with EA. Like too
Yeah,
many
it's
abbreviations here.
it's really an exciting time for technology in the EA space. And one of the things probably back in 2017 was to try and really augment architects. And so one of the things as we pursue AI, it's not looking to replace architects, but that in many cases we find that the ratio to the amount of work that they could use to promote transformation in an organization, there's not enough. And so how could we accelerate and really enhance the way that the architects work? So we started to consider a number of different elements, looking through data for patterns, doing things like classification, categorization. It was a little bit of smaller task, imagining back in the 2017-18 timeframe. And so we had a little bit of a slow evolution. But last year, we launched a full AI team inside of Mega. So we've got a lead data scientist with a deep AI experience. And of course, about 3 to 4 months after we built this AI team, the Chat GPT generative AI trend hit. And of course, everybody's buzzing about that. And we had to look at it from a perspective, and I'm a technologist at heart, but you have to pause and say, well, yes, we should look at this, but how do we add value to the user, not just apply cool
Mm.
technology? And so we started to reimagine and re-envision that same augmentation, but now with this generative capability. So a few things that we've been working on, just as an example, is lower maturity architecture practices tend to start with application portfolio. It's a great place to start. It's
True.
it's quick value, it's high visibility.
Mhm.
But we find in some organizations that they end up collecting data for significant amounts of time and they struggle to organize it and they struggle to establish a business frame of reference for real rationalization. So we put in place an AI that takes discovered technology, so you can deploy discovery agents, find technologies, and the AI will determine if the technologies that are found represent business applications or not. And so it already starts to filter out some of the noise and put them in the proper direction and portfolios. From there, it looks at those business applications and it determines if there's enough information to propose the business capabilities that that business application typically supports. So if you pull an industry capability model as an example, you discover technology, the AI will start fitting the discovered technologies that represent business applications up to a capability model. What this does is it takes something that may take a lower maturity organization months and in some cases even a year or more, and it brings it down towards weeks so that they can really start delivering value. As mentioned before, it's augmentation. So none of this takes the decision making power away from the architect. None of it takes the work away from the architect. It just accelerates their time to value so they can really get recognition. And we do find that EA, in terms of success, is really about delivering recognizable value. And I've got a caveat: the value has to be recognized by those outside of EA. That's when EA succeeds. So I've got a lot more to talk about
Yeah.
on the AI for Mega, but just I'll pause to see if there are any questions so far in terms of that first concept.
No, I think it's a perfect. Like we also see a lot of our clients start with like the application portfolio, and there's like hurdles that you mentioned. So perfect there, and also um, the last comment, like I always call like the what's in it for them. Like think of kind of like your stakeholders and who you're doing this for. It's also a very very important part. Um, but I also like how you tackled with Mega how to overcome some of the burdens of the data collection. So, what's are kind of like some of the um, areas, or how do you balance kind of like the I take away, I use AI to accelerate and give kind of like, or move away some of the maybe tedious tasks, but still I keep the enterprise architect in control of the data. So how does that balance kind of like work?
It is a great question. So first is, you're absolutely right. A goal is to remove some of the tedium where it's not value add. Something that takes time of an architecture resource, which at many organizations is not inexpensive, and then puts it towards really the value add beneficial elements. Now, when we get towards augmentation beyond tedium, the AI is going to provide recommendations with confidence levels, but the architect is still going to make the decision. And we can capture those decision details. So that's where we're going to balance it. So, for example, I mentioned the case of technologies and the determination of business applications.
Mhm.
It's gonna put out and say, the AI will say, "I believe these are business applications with this level of confidence." The architect will run through a validation and say, "I agree, I don't agree," and then we can continue to learn from that, so it benefits Mega, but the architect still stays in control. If I look at other elements of AI support that we're working on, we're also going to do things like, as we populate these technologies, let's use generative AI to bolster that. So, for example, I find 1,000 technologies. I don't want to have to go and key in manually the descriptions of these technologies, but not everybody may know what each technology is or represents. So in addition to the alignment to capabilities, we can go and use generative AI to give descriptions, and it'll be marked as such that it came from the generative AI. So the architects, again, they can review it. Consumers can
Mhm.
know that there's a chance of something being correct. But in general, that level of information is going to be pretty high quality across an inventory. And so consumers can start drawing from this application portfolio, saying, hey, what is that technology? What does it do? And there's very minimal effect or input from the architect at this point. It's showing you what exists, it's telling you what it is, and it's been affirmed by the architect as a business application or not, and it's been affirmed to its alignment to business capabilities. So there's an area of balance there. Another notion in terms of balancing the AI and the architect is going back to generative AI, is we're teaching our own instance of a generative AI at the documentation of the products, as well as methods, best practices, and general value proposition for architecture. So now an architect maybe who's struggling to frame a value proposition, maybe to do a more complex task that they haven't done yet, they can ask our AI assistant, say, how do I do this? Is there value in doing this? What could I gain if I brought these two groups together?
Hmm.
And it will start sharing some ideas and some insights. So, for example, if we took traditional, let's say the app portfolio still, they start there, and the group has the ability to expand into a risk perspective or a data perspective. So maybe they've got interest from a risk organization in their company, and they say, I can help them, but can I help them differently than just pure support for their risk management because I've got this portfolio? And they can ask the AI assistant, say, hey, what kind of value proposition might I be able to deliver because I've got a portfolio and I'm working with the risk team? What could I do? My computer just turned its screensaver on, so bear with I come back.
No worries.
All right, sorry about
We
that.
can still see and hear you. No worries.
Perfect, perfect. So those are some of the areas where we're balancing to keep the
Mhm.
architect's value in charge. Today, the focus again is augmentation, such that using the AI benefits the effectiveness, efficiency of the architects without trying to replace the architects.
Yeah.
Cool. So earlier, before we got into the live session, Dan and I were discussing how AI can really utilize, or how EA can really utilize um, AI from either revamping an EA organization or even initiating a new one. I mean, a startup. Because that's a significant amount of work we do is going in and helping stand up or revamp EA organizations and modernize them. So I'm assuming that the mega tool, because all EA's got to be based on a tool or should be on some type of management repository, that would be one of the ways, right? Is to automate all of those, what I would call small tasks, so that the architect can then focus on more high value activities.
Yeah, exactly. It's really about value. And one of the traps where AI can help is that the architects tend to focus on maturity assessments that are somewhat inward focused. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're expanding their own skills. They're producing deliverables that they feel are more impactful and more important. And we try to remind them to do, as you stated, to go out and test the value recognition by those stakeholders. And
Yeah.
if the AI and the tooling can help highlight areas that have value not only for the architect, but also to demonstrate ways that value can be communicated, it just increases the chance of success. And this is a sort of a, I guess I'll call it a funny habit of enterprise architects, is that they're often not as comfortable with that outward communication of value and the
Yeah.
credit that the team deserves. And so
Uh-huh.
I had given a presentation about a year ago now, speaking to exactly this topic, the value of EA, how to get attention from stakeholders. And after the presentation, an individual came to me and said, "Hey, I've got a question. I produce an architectural deliverable every month for my stakeholders. I give it to them and they immediately toss it in the trash. They don't see any value. What should I do?" And I said, "Well, what was the expectation of the stakeholder and what did they explain that was missing in the deliverable? Where was the gap?" And he
Mm-hmm.
said, "Oh, I haven't actually asked them yet." And and so for me, this is a common issue where with tooling, with AI, it won't solve that problem. It still requires the architect, going back to augmentation.
Mm-hmm.
But the architects will have better ideas, better value statements, better tips and tricks, if you will, as well as less time spent on tedious tasks, more time spent on value delivery, so that they can really highlight the benefit that the EA practice gives to the organization. The other thing on that topic is we advise that they consider their EA practice in terms of the EA services that they're offering,
Their
and that
service
they,
catalog. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, an EA service catalog. What is it you're doing for the organization? Who are the stakeholders that are going to benefit from those services? And then you can validate with those stakeholders. Now go back to those EA services. What capabilities, EA capabilities, do you
Mm-hmm.
need to deliver those EA services? And then what other EA services could those EA capabilities support? So you can start planning for expansion, requiring service definitions and stakeholders in doing so.
Yeah, Karsten runs a great workshop right off the bat when we engage with customers for EA. His workshop is pretty well known, and it basically goes through who are your stakeholders, what's your service catalog, what's your capabilities, and what are the core processes to deliver those. Um,
That's awesome.
so,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
very
Uh,
strongly aligned. We
uh,
recommend that. So I endorse that approach very strongly. Yeah, very
Excellent.
cool.
Um, so like what I found super interesting when I first heard this a couple months back is that so you started your EA work way before kind of like ChatGPT hit as kind of like public, so you already were kind of like ahead of the curve, so to say. But how did kind of like the generative AI, ChatGPT being like so in the public mind change it? Was it something where it was easier for you to sometimes explain some of the features or how to work with the features because some of your enterprise architects were already working with ChatGPT or similar things because they kind of like because I think it's also a skill set that you need to like work with and understand what can you trust, where do you need to maybe also refine the input or the prompting or things like that. So tell us a little bit about kind of like that journey.
Yeah, so the early phases of our introduction to AI, it was more tricky in that, one, without the generative AI, we've got less options to consider in terms of what we're focused on, unless we were to build our own generative AI, which was not on the roadmap. And so putting in things like categorization, classification, we were working with computer vision. We did have a chat bot that would build models conversationally, but it was a little bit harder to get it moving. And I say that a little bit because it was also much easier than we expected. So it was harder than today with some of the technologies, but much easier than we expected with the way AI gets packaged by the number of vendors who are offering AI services. Now, though, with ChatGPT in the news, AI is front of mind for essentially everyone. And so when you start discussing capabilities and evolution, it's going to come up. If you say, "Oh, we're working on injecting artificial intelligence to augment the architect," they're going to say, "Oh, what's the generative feature functionality you're mentioning? You know, how is it? How's the Chat GPT?" It's right away that's going to be asked, and there's a deep curiosity because it is somewhat amazing if you're not exposed to technologies, and even to some extent if you are, and you start to see what ChatGPT can do. And so people really are very curious now. Whereas before, like, yeah, AI is cool, it's necessary, it's going to be a game changer, but it's not the level of curiosity that we're seeing today. And so it was right away, okay, cool tech, everybody's talking about it. What's the value add for the customer so that we're not forcing
Mm.
technology into an area where it doesn't make sense or doesn't fit? And that's where we thought, look, knowing the architects and the personalities that are typically there, that they'll have questions, and we can kind of merge our help where they can ask questions about usage and architectural methods, but they can also speak to value and training it up to help them drive some of that value pitch and value conversation.
Interesting.
Now, I do see a question.
Yes, there.
Do you want to take those off the wall? Is
Perfect.
that
Yes.
okay?
Yes. I
Um,
just wanted to let everybody know. I know kind of like I think Nana already also put it in the LinkedIn chat, but feel free to ask questions if you're watching this on LinkedIn Live as a live session. We have Dan here to answer it. So this is the best part. If you look at the recording, you just deal with what other people ask for questions. So we had a first question come in. Can you see AI defining new reference models or adapting the architecture development method from TOGAF from a set of requirements? So kind of like more the framework setup question here.
Yeah, so I'll split that in two, sort of the
Sure.
reference model perspective. I think one of the things, and we're researching this now with AI, is pattern detection. You know, can it find common patterns? Can it highlight commonality? And if it looks across an architecture, and if you've got, for example, quality assessments performed on the architecture, we could say at a capability level, at a technological level, and if the AI finds patterns that state, you know, these patterns are consistently recognized or assessed as positive, these patterns are consistently assessed or recognized as negative, it can start to propose reference models that can be pointed towards and common patterns that it's identified throughout the architecture. So this, I think, is going to be an interesting evolution in augmentation of the architect, that they can populate and design their architectures, and the AI can start highlighting patterns and trends that work well and those that don't. This is particularly useful because architects, especially the more granular architects towards solution architect level, may get into a habit of sticking with sort of what they know. It's not a judgment, it's a common practice. But if I choose a certain technology set, I might keep deploying that. And here we can look at, hey, the assessments, there's certain problems with that approach. They're revealed in the assessment, and the AIs can highlight that. When it comes to the ADM or frameworks in general, we could see that if I have a value proposition, I've got augmentation, could I get some methodological guidance or direction? Yes, I do imagine that. And that's a part I mentioned we've started. I'm not going to tell you that it's perfect and covers every case and scenario, but we've begun
Not yet.
training. Not yet, no. Hopefully not for a little bit, but it'll continue to improve such that we're looking to give method and directional guidance. And if it can look for your outcomes you're trying to achieve, it can look at data, for example, that you've got available to you and start speaking to the best ways in which you can deliver the most value. We do envision that, but that also is in sort of the research phase with a little bit implemented into the assistant. So yes, I see a lot going on with the ability to identify reference models, and I'll call it method support in terms of the framework question.
Cool. Very good. Thank you, Dan. We'll just go straight to the next one. What type of data sets do you use in your work that you described earlier? Let's just say.
Yeah, very cool question. So first, we've got a few things in play here. We deal with discovery. So that's going to be, we have a partner we use for discovery. It could be your own discovery. So it's finding technologies through agents, et cetera, bringing it back. Those tend to be then installed on specific systems. They can be agentless. It can scan a network, but it's still going to be pulling stuff that's installed. We have a separate partner that we interact with that can detect SaaS and cloud-based stuff that's not deployed cloud, but purely URL-based cloud. So we can bring all that data in. When we bring that data in, if it's discovered, that means that the product that discovered knows what it is. It provides a certain set of metadata. So we have details about the product that we can use to get more information about those products. And that's where the generative AI in conjunction with the categorization classification AI plays. And so we train the model, we feed it this type of data, we train its ability to detect business applications from technologies, and it's going to look for things like a general functional categorization of a product. So is it a lower level software development technology, or is it something like an ERP? And so looking at that kind of categorization, it can start to determine that it's more or less likely to be a business application versus a pure technology. And then similarly, we train it on certain elements that say, well, what are the typical capabilities that are going to be supported by, let's say, an ERP, just to continue with that example. And we can then use natural language processing to look at the capabilities that the users have identified and have sort of a basis capability. So if I generically use one about, let's say, accounts or resource management or what have you, then you may name it differently in your capability model, but we can understand that with the AI looking at it and saying, okay, they called it this, but it's akin or similar to this base capability, therefore this piece would align to it. So there's a lot of information that's fed into it. And then for those who will opt in, we're hoping to get feedback from, of course, the users themselves. It won't be forced, but they'll be able to opt in to say, yes, if we correct the AI and say, no, that we don't agree that it should be supportive of that capability. We don't agree that that's a business application. We can take that data back, revisit it, retrain, and then republish the intelligence. So that's some of the pieces that go into the AI.
Cool. Christian, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, there you
go. Thank you. I really like kind of like the feedback loop. I think that's kind of like a key and really driving improvement and getting better and making this better for everybody. I think we as an industry need to constantly also think about those feedbacks and really building a bigger capacity for us all. And that's why we also run these LinkedIn Lives to kind of like get the word out more to more people, make them aware of what's coming. And I think it's something I tried kind of like just with like some business objects, data objects, information objects, however you want to call it, and kind of like give me definitions for them with a generative AI. And it was kind of like a very mixed experience there. Some were kind of like okay, some were like totally off. So because I think it's also like the AI needs to learn what kind of like in the EA space and the abstract concept that, as you mentioned, kind of like with the business applications. What is really a business application? So it's some modeling involved there as well, and it's I think it's some training and learning over time.
Well, I think your
Well,
example, though, is a great one in terms of the generative AI may or may not come back with exactly what you expect.
yeah.
And if we want to offer value to the customers, we've got to test that out, play around with the prompts, the way in which we ask it, the cases in which we apply it initially, so that it's not only cool technology, but that has real value to the organization.
Yeah. And that I think is a perfect segue into the next question about the specific EAAI tool. Well, we need to like work on those abbreviations.
Yeah, so Mega is producing AI tools in HopeX. And so I mentioned one of the cases was the application, we call it APM automation or intelligent APM automation. We've
And
got the assistant, the generative
that
AI
is
assistant.
accessible today.
Yeah, you can use
Okay,
that today.
okay.
Yep. The
Just
generative assistant is, I believe, is also available today. That one I have to check because I've been using it for a while to help participate in training. And it is, so I'll validate that, but I believe that's also available today. And there's a number of other things in the works, some on the front end, some even in the back end. So, for example, the AI team is also working on incident resolution in terms of any problems with the platform. And so if somebody reports an issue, we will have the AIs going through scanning the logs, looking for pattern-based problem scenarios, proposing root causes, and reducing significantly the time it takes to remedy for everyone the issue that's uncovered. So a lot of conversation around the use of AI in EA, and that is tricky to say now that I'm trying to say it myself. And we're continuing though to try and keep a focus on value to make sure that we don't get too enamored by the tech, that we really stay true to delivering the value on the customer
Mm.
side.
hmm. What do you see kind of like also in combined data sets? So I remember actually when I worked for an organization in the US a couple of years back, we actually built and like we called it IT data lake, where we put in like lots of incident data combined with kind of like the EA data with scanning from um, testing and software quality, like SonarQube data. So it's kind of like all those data to kind of like find, is there something where we can predict based on changes that happen and then incidents being reported, and what's kind of like an area where poor coding quality leads to potentially more incidents or not, things like that, to kind of like predict your um, before the incident happened, to kind of like
Yep.
say, okay, where can we like refine something?
No,
So how often, or is that something that you also evaluate, kind of like looking at the data across, potentially also like log file data that people could ingest and kind of like find patterns in that
yep.
perspective?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So yes, absolutely. One of the things that's been going on is the AI team working with the lab, first to review what data is incorporated into the logs and what might be necessary for an AI to benefit or better advise. And so there's a data conversation, absolutely.
Hmm.
Additionally, I forget how many, but a number of years ago, 4 or 5, maybe even a little more, we added certain health checks to the platform as well. So it can tell if it's starting to degrade in performance, if it's running into certain issues, and it can determine that before the problem occurs. Today, sort of an alert would go to a person and say, hey, something's going on. Let's generically say the system's running slower than it's supposed to. Um, Tomorrow, the idea is that that alert might go to the AI and say, can you check the logs? See what's there because I'm slowing down. And the AI might come back and say, okay, I found an issue, and then alert the person to say, hey, we have this issue. accelerating the resolution. But yes, the goal, of course, would be to be more predictive, to get ahead of the pain points in the problem. And there is a data-oriented collaboration going on between the AI team and the lab to ensure that the information needed to make that work is in place. And of course, then balancing the addition of tracking more logs and more data with the need to continue to increase and scale performance. And so just that kind of dialogue back and forth can be an interesting one where you have to make sure that you're not over collecting at the sacrifice of performance, etc.
Awesome. You're really doing amazing work there, Dan. So really looking forward also to the things that you know or you already work with that we
Oh,
hopefully see in the future.
there's a lot. It's wild.
So we're actually already like coming a little bit to an end here. If there are still questions, I think Dan, you're still available for a little bit, but
Absolutely.
here's like one from me. um, Also, I just tested if that works actually. If I put questions in here in LinkedIn Live, so where do you see kind of like EA's using AI in the future? Kind of like if you look ahead, is it something where you also see AI generating kind of like a target landscape or like making recommendations of like how to implement improvements to your IT landscape? Is that something that you see in the future as well, or is it more kind of like on the data side? What's kind of like areas where you see in the future are coming?
So yes, the short answer to the last part of the question is yes. We do see that the AIs, as they continue to be trained specifically in the vendor space, because one of the things that would differentiate the vendors offering AI support from, let's say, generally ChatGPT is we're going to look to validate the training data to make sure that the information is accurate and useful. So when it does provide architectural advice or guidance, it's one that comes from real data that's been vetted and experience-based outcomes. We have implemented already, and it's a little bit of a gimmick to test it, but it works, where you can talk to the generative AI and describe what you do, and it will give you a process model. And so we're playing around with more of that where it can create models. You can even test this on ChatGPT today. If you ask it about, for example, an Archimate model, it'll ask you some clarifying questions and try to create for you an architectural view. Now, I wouldn't trust the result because, again, it's trained by sort of a broad set of non-validated data. But those are things that we would be looking towards in an augmentation capacity is we'll have, and we already have, for example, templates. So let's say I've got a deployment template that's been validated by security. I've got a solution need. I might have a conversation with the AI specifying some of the functional and non-functional requirements, and the platform through the AI is proposing combinations of technologies to fulfill functional needs that stay in compliance with security targets or privacy targets or what have you. I think that cross-referencing is going to be one of the cool areas. So if I've got operational excellence needs and I've got regulatory needs, which may run counter to each other, could the AI assist in finding the right balance so that I stay regulatory compliant but achieve the optimal operational excellence? Things like this are where we see it going. Still focused again on augmentation, but just increasing the value of that augmentation.
So would those show up as features within HopX?
Yet some of them do. Some of them are in the assistant, which is a
Oh,
separate place
okay.
you go for today. And some would be in the platform itself. And so the APM automation is embedded in the platform so that where the work is done, the AI is guiding and accelerating that element. And then the assistant being sort of on the side, if you will, something that can be updated constantly and easily interacted with. And generatives. And then there's hybrids. We have some where you're in the platform and then it makes calls out to a generative AI to bring a result back
Okay.
so that the data is
Good to
private.
know. Good to know. I'd love to see a demo of that. So personally, I'll schedule that
next
on the
week.
side.
Yeah.
And then next, but that's another point. Next week we have Dan for a webinar. So make sure to sign up for that as well. I will post a link here in a second. But before we come to that last question, I think for the day, Do you see a link between large language models and knowledge graphs, semantic modeling as a data or tech support for future EA tools?
So we would consider EA itself a knowledge graph. The link between the large language models, knowledge graphs, semantic models, is a data tech support for EA tools. I would see, and I'm not sure if I'm reading the question correctly, but that EA tools in the intersection with AI would support AI progression, helping clarify the data across an organization. So, one of the things that we see is that if you're pursuing AI as we are, you've got to understand the data you have, what the data represents, where the data is, and the context, of course, of that data in order to establish the right basis to train the language models. And so, using architectures, knowledge graphs, and semantic models to feed or to clarify
Mhm.
where the data is, what the data is, does it meet the right quality criteria, have I scoped and segmented it properly? So separating data domains, but also understanding even locale or cultural impact. So I do see EA supporting an evolution related to AI. I'm not sure that's the intent of the question. If not, of course, the contact, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to pursue further.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, Gartner, the research group, said that 85% of the machine learning and AI projects are failing for two reasons. One, technical debt, and secondly, no clear data, no process owners, underlying data issues, which I thought, so you just answered that question and how EA can drive machine learning and AI.
Yeah, and it's interesting because another common fail point is that AI initiatives suffer the same fate of EA initiatives as they focus on the
Yes.
tech
Yeah.
and not on the business outcome.
Yeah. Even
And so I,
though it's been proven that you get a return on investment with cloud after 3 years. I'm like, not figured that one out. So, but I've always felt like EA could step in there, but I just don't think it's communicated enough where EA could focus to bring that value.
yeah, to your example of cloud, one of the advisory elements that's in the platform is that the platform will help you determine from the 6 R's of cloud migration
Mhm.
based on details in the architecture. So dependencies, complexities, it can help propose. Again, architect makes final decision. It's just advising and guiding, but it's looking to push in that direction. I do see one, and I can answer it very quickly. Comment more than question on the LinkedIn list up here,
Mm.
talking about moving Mega's help to the AI. That's exactly what we did, and so that's the AI assistant will answer all those questions conversationally. So yes, we agree, and that's what we did. So looking forward to it's anonymized, but whomever you are, to sharing that with you.
Okay.
Will do. Plus, if you have more questions or also want to know more about it, we already had the question like we want to potentially also see some of that. There's a longer session next week with Dan, a webinar. So please register to get like a first-hand experience there. Also, and we will also post the link to that in the comments of LinkedIn, so people can like directly go to that.
And if you're on the West Coast, you don't have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to watch it. You can see a recording.
Correct. Recordings of today's session, but also previous LinkedIn Lives that Jean and I did with like other industry experts and really thought leaders, as we have Dan here from Mega. There is a bunch of other talks available on our Lean 42 Academy. These are for free. We do have like from our conference also paid content there, but lots of free stuff to grow your knowledge and really build a bigger capacity in our EA IT leaders CIO community here.
Very cool.
So for any final words, Jean, before we end this?
No, I have a ton of questions, but I'm going to be talking to Daniel later. So,
Daniel, any final comments? Any final thoughts?
Just kind of a quick recap to take the value perspective, and I'll put this into the webinar presentation next week also, is really focus on that value delivery to stakeholders outside of the EA team.
Mhm.
And we can show you ways in which you can leverage the platform to assist in that. We can guide you as well in non-tooling perspectives, but please keep that in mind that value is only recognized when it's delivered outside of EA. Otherwise, the EA will struggle. And we can show you ways of supporting AI, but many other use cases, and that'll be kind of the lead in for next week's webinars. We'll pick up on value delivery and some of the ways in which AI can support or we can support AI.
Great.
Yeah. And one final comment from me. We will actually also have something upcoming to share with you when it comes to AI and guidelines about AI. So it's something where we experienced that enterprise architecture also more requested to what kind of like guidance can EA give the organization on using AI and the technology landscape and principles and standards around that. So that's also something that where we as CIO advisors come often in, or like recently very often like are asked in that area. So if that is something you're interested in, just hit us up as well. So you can guide enterprise as enterprise architects the artificial intelligence implementation in your organization. With that, thank you so much, Gene, for co-hosting this with me. Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing your really great in-depth knowledge, and looking forward to see more on that next week.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the conversation.
Bye,
Have a great day.
everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.